Luis, why did you turn to theater?
Wait, what now?
Why did you turn to theater?
Why did I turn to theater? That's an excellent question. You know, I think all kids turn to theater. I'm still 6 years old, by the way. I will be 83 in June, but I'm still 6, deep down inside. And every artist that I have met, you know, I can see the kid in them, including my compañero here. You sustain a kind of youthfulness if you respect being a child, you know. And again, being poor, being a farm worker, born in Delano. I was born in a labor camp, a farm labor camp in Chinatown in Delano, California, 1940. It was actually my grandmother's shack in this labor camp. And my mother went there to get me birth. And she took me there when I was old enough to understand these things. And the camp was abandoned because it was going to be torn down at that time. But I remember walking into this beat up 2-room shack with the kitchen open to the backyard. And there was an old bed with no mattress, just the spring. And she said, "Aquí, mijo, aquí naciste," you know, this is where you were born. And it was embarrassing to me. But it impressed me, the fact that I had been born in this place. I'm so glad that she took me there. I realized early on that we were poor, and that we were farm workers, and that we were Mexican, and that we lived in a context that did not respect farm workers, nor Mexicans, nor people of color in general. And we were the poorest of the poor. My family arrived in the San Joaquin Valley. My parents were born in Arizona, by the way. My dad was born in Nogales, my mother in Mammoth, Arizona. So they were already second generation, but coming from Sonora. But the fact is that they were brought there because in the 1920s, Delano was developing king grape and king cotton, and they needed loads of cheap labor. So they used to train them in, bring in train loads from Arizona and wherever, Texas, to work in the fields. And so that's how my family got to California. But by the 1940s, we were still there. The Depression for us lasted into the 1950s. And I was very aware there were injustices. But I had to entertain myself in some way. And one of the ways that I did was, for instance, picking potatoes. I remember finding, you know, stoop labor and picking potatoes. I found this potato that this is before Mr. Potato Head. But it had a nose, you know what I mean? And I said, wow, this is amazing. And so I took the potato and stuck my finger on it. I had a puppet. And so I was able to play with it, you know. But that was just the beginning. I usually tell the story of how I got hooked in a labor camp. The teacher, it's a long story. We were picking cotton in a place called Stratford, not Stratford on the Avon, Stratford on the San Joaquin. And the cotton season went like that. There were 2,000 people out there, army tents, army surplus tents. It was right after World War II, 1946. And everybody started to go pick grapes. We couldn't leave because my dad's pickup had broken down. And we used to fish in the San Joaquin River Delta to eat. And my mom would make tortillas and we'd bring the fish. We were eating fish tacos before it was trendy. But one morning, early in the morning, I fell into the canal and almost drowned, and my mother got panicked, and she said, maybe you and your brother better go to school. And so we hopped on the bus and went to Stratford School. I knew I wasn't going to be there very long. I concentrated on my lunch in this little brown paper bag. And one day, I used to save it, take it back to my mom. One day, it was missing at the end of the day. The bus was leaving. The teacher saw me panic, and she said, what happened? What do you need? And I said, it's my paper bag. Oh, a little brown paper bag. I took it. And I said, well, give it back. And she says, I can't. And she escorted me into a little back room, and there was my bag all ripped up, floating in a basin of water. And she picked up a piece and dipped it into some paste and then put it on a mold that was an animal. It was a monkey. And I said, wow. And it was November already. I knew it couldn't be for Halloween. What's this for? And she said, it's for a play. The whole school is involved. We're going to need 2 first graders to play monkeys because it's Christmas in the jungle. So I forgave her about the bag, you know. I auditioned, and I got my first role in the theater as a monkey. And I got a costume that was better than my own clothes, you know. I mean, green pants, you know, and a red cap, and boots, and a tail. Anyway, I was in heaven, you know. I saw this whole school being transformed into a jungle with fake trees. I was my debut before the world was coming up. But the week of the presentation, it was on a Friday. On the Tuesday or so, I came home, and my mom says, we're leaving tomorrow. And I said, but Mom, the show's on Friday. And she says, I know, but we're being evicted, and we've got to go. So I cried, but ni modo, mano, you know. The next morning, my dad got the truck started by hook and by crook, and man, we left. San Joaquin Valley fog was coming. We drove out of Stratford, and I felt this big hole opening up in my chest, and I thought I was doomed. No, that happens to a lot of kids. But that 6-year-old survived, and because he took a few things with him. He took the hole, which is still there, but the hole became the hungry mouth of my creativity. And I took the secret of paper mache with me, because she made a mask, a monkey mask, out of my mother's taco bag. And she also took my love, my unrequited love of the theater, and also residual anger, because we had been evicted from the labor camp. So 73 years later, or 70-some years later, that hole is still there. It's much smaller. But for over 7 decades, I've been pouring poems and plays and stories, and it's kept me alive. And it just goes to show you a firm belief that you can take any negative and turn it into a positive.
Jorge?
How do you follow that? I mean, really, Luis? I was born in the White Memorial Hospital in Boyle Heights. Two years after him, so I'm younger, all right? And I had a wonderful upbringing. I was introduced to theater very early on, just doing school plays. We would put on plays in the backyard. We had a very mixed neighborhood. It had not yet become barrio with Cypress Park. And so we had friends from all over, and we would put on plays and what have you. And at the age of about 11, I got a call. My mother got a call. Her best friend, La Señora Alvarado's son, was in movies. He was a kid, a young Mexican kid, and he'd grown up. So they wanted another cute Mexican kid. I fit the bill. And so I was signed up by this agency, the wrong agency. The agency for Hispanics was the Alvarado agency, but that wasn't Lolo Moore. And so she didn't really push me, and my mother didn't like the theater. She was raised by a minister, my grandfather. Also, they were from Sonora as well. And he became a Presbyterian minister, so she was a very, very religious person. And because my father was a mariachi, a musician, not to mention que le gustaba tomar, and so she said, no, but I really wanted to do that. I wanted to be a movie star. And so I was on TV in the 50s. Your great-grandparents watched me. I was on one of only 3 stations in the country. ABC, NBC, and CBS. Everything else didn't exist. And so I was seen by literally a third of the nation on these television programs that would be, I always played a Mexican. I tell people this was my horror story. I spent the 50s on a 12-inch screen in black and white, wearing white pajamas and marachis and a broken straw hat. I played always a Mexican. I never got, we had no Mexican Americans back then, of course. So that's what they thought. So that's how I started. And but I'm going to stop there so that we can hear some more from this one over here.
No, actually, I was on television also when I was...
Was it NBC, CBS, or ABC?
It was a local station in San Jose, you know. They had KNTV, started in 1956. I was in high school. And I went from working puppets and working paper mache, and I became a ventriloquist. I had 2 dummies by the time I got to high school. One was a Jerry Mahoney dummy that I called Allie Nelson. I put a little mustache on him, a little goatee, little hat, said cool cat. He had to be cool, you know, to be with me, you know. It was kind of Pachuquito, you know, but Anglo. And then, so I realized, I saw Paco Miller, actually, in the San Joaquin Valley, Mexican, Argentine playwright, but famous in Mexico, with Don Roque, and that shamed me. I said, I need a Mexican puppet. So I made a dummy out of balsa wood and became Marcelino Pipin. So I had two dummies, and they had a bilingual dialogue going. Ali Nelson would speak in English, Marcelino would talk in Spanish. He had a little Mexican hat. And then I was like, no, sir, nobody, don't argue, guys. Come on. Let's get but these were my two dual identities. You know, I had dueling identities, Anglo against Mexican, but I was able to play with it. Well, anyway, someone saw me, and they invited me on the inaugural broadcast at KNTV, which is now Channel 11, which is the NBC affiliate in the Bay Area. And there was a half hour in Spanish to satisfy FCC regulations, and 5 minutes of that half hour was my act. And so I was invited in the inaugural show. They loved it. I was a hit, so they invited me to become a regular. So every Sunday, my family was living on a dirt street in Salsipuedes in East San Jose, and I was on TV every Sunday. So that really established my credentials in high school. They saw me on TV, and I used to write my own scripts, and I had an art director. I mean, I was exposed to show business, and I loved it. I said, I could do this. But then the show was canceled after 16 weeks or something. It didn't last long. Actually, the host was arrested. That's a long story, you know, Don Jesus Valenzuela. I'm coming to the show, and he's going out. The cops have him. I said, where's our show, you know? But anyway, we got canceled, but that was my first experience as a professional working on television, in black and white television, 1956.
So now you have a new dummy, me.
I have an important question. What are the origins of El Teatro? What inspired you to create Teatro Campesino?
El Teatro Campesino. I go back to the monkey mask story. 20 years after that, approximately 20 years after we left that labor camp, I went to Cesar Chavez and pitched him the idea of a theater of, by, and for farm workers. Working in labor camps, and I had my dummies, I was able at night to perform for the workers. They have a campfire, and I would put up my dummies, and since I was bilingual, I attracted a crowd. I mean, it was free. People from all over the state, you know, and we met them at different camps. So I was performing in the labor camps already as a ventriloquist, and I said, this is the place, I can do this. And I began to then imagine that maybe I could do theater. I became a playwright. After high school, I decided to become a playwright, and I went to San Jose State. I left the dummies behind and focused. I was a math and physics major for the first year, okay? Straight A. The reason I mention this is because I don't look like a math and physics major, you know? But I love mathematics, I love science. I was going to go to the moon, and I planned to be the first astronaut. It didn't work out that way. But I remembered performing at the labor camps, and I said, maybe there's a way to do this. And when I was in college, I discovered Federico Garcia Lorca. And I discovered that one of the things that he'd had a company called La Barraca out of the University of Madrid. And what they did is they used to take a truck, climb in the truck, and go perform in the Spanish countryside. They perform his plays, Blood Wedding, you know, La Casa de Bernarda Alba, Yerma, all these classic, beautiful, brilliant plays were performed out in the Spanish. That's what got him killed, because people thought he was a communist because he would have popular following. But I had that with me through my college education. And I said, Garcia Lorca did it on a truck. So I said, maybe I could do theater on a truck. So in 1965, my nana, who still lived in the valley, my grandmother, my dad's mom, sent my dad a copy of El Malcriado. And I discovered that there was something afoot back in my home turf, back in Delano, and back in Early Mart. I thought that was the sump hole of the universe, frankly.
What was El Malcriado?
El Malcriado was the farm workers' newspaper. Sorry, thank you. and it was a little sheet like that. It had comics, and it was just really rudimentary. Don Sotaco, I think you saw some of the images sketched by Andy Cermeño, and Don Coyote and the Patroncito appeared in copies of El Malcriado. I saw that, and I said, this can be dramatized. I had the same experience when I saw Diego Rivera's murals in Mexico in the summer of '63 in Mexico City. I saw his murals and I said, this looks like theater to me. I want to do theater that reflects Diego Rivera. And then when I saw Andy Cermeño's sketches, I said, those are my characters. I need to do this. And so what is this Cesar Chavez up to? This is the summer of '65. I'm working with the San Francisco Mime Troupe as an actor. After I graduated with a degree in English in '64, I moved to San Francisco hoping that my play, The Shrunken Pancho Villa, my first full-length play, could be performed or produced in San Francisco. There was no luck. I did a workshop production, some scenes at the Mime Troupe, but I was acting in the parks. And they used to put the stage together, you know, all wooden, and then go from park to park. And that taught me you can go anywhere. You can set up and perform. And of course, it was the beginning of the culture revolution, the counterculture revolution. Ronnie Davis was the founder and the artistic director. He was a little hard on people, but he always treated me kindly, so that was good. Our business manager was Bill Graham, you know, the rock impresario. I don't know if you know his name. But the thing is that I was there as the cultural revolution was starting to happen. Acid was coming in, marijuana was coming in. It was a wonderful head-turning experience. But I needed reality, you know what I mean? I needed my roots. So all of these elements took me straight back to Delano. When the strike started, it was like an electric bolt for me. I said, I've got to be there. I've got to go. I was finishing my commitments to the Mime Troupe on the weekends. So the first chance I got, I went to Delano and I talked to Cesar. Met to Dolores first, and then I talked to Cesar and pitched him the idea of a theater up by and for farm workers. And he said, well, you know, there's no money to do theater in Delano. There are no actors in Delano. There isn't any place or time to rehearse. Do you still want to do it? And I said, absolutely, Cesar. What an opportunity. I wanted to plug into my hometown. Half the strikers were my relatives to begin with. And they had people that were founding members of the United Farm Workers, my cousins, my tios and tias. And the other half of my family were scabs. They were breaking the strike. So I was right in the middle of a family dispute. Talk about family again. I went there to connect with my family on a whole different level now. But I went there now as a playwright, hoping that I could do something. And Cesar was absolutely right. There was no place to perform. We had the picket line. So El Teatro Campesino began on the picket line. You see the early actos that you've seen in the images. And the actos became then the seed of El Teatro Campesino. The actos are still important. The word means action. It means act. It doesn't mean pretend. It means do. It means do something. And we were in the middle of life-threatening situations. People were killed during the Great Strike. And I was beaten and jailed like so many of my compañeros. Dolores also had the hell beaten out of her. At one point, almost killed her in San Francisco. But the fact is that when you believe in something, anything can happen. Miracles can happen. But they're tiny miracles that come from people. These are the things that can change the world. And I felt that I was part of a movement. I was seed of a movement. And I was able to seed it with the arts. Our objective was to bring the power of the arts, of self-expression, into the huelga, into the union, and to the lives of farm workers. Well, I think, you know, doors have been opened, you know, by others. And again, another element, another thread in my life has been that the Pachuco element. Now, I need to say, I think you saw the pictures of the La Seca Tortilleria up there. That was the first teatro. We were in a garage, you know. The teatro was a little great box with 2 masks in it, which I used to put under the army cot where I used to sleep in the pink house. That was the teatro. The people were the teatro. But the first building, after a couple of years the union rented for us, was that tortilleria, which belonged to one of my tias, actually my mother's cousin. But back in 1940, I was born across the street from my tia's 2 shacks. And in 1941, a family came from Arizona and moved into one of her shacks that she rented to them. And it was the Chavez family. there were two teenagers, CC and Rookie. And CC was a Pachuco. He became a Pachuco in the late 40s. And his running partner was one of my cousins, Billy Miranda. And I really had tremendous respect for Billy. He taught me the word Chicano. My mother and my aunt were arguing in the kitchen one time about who we were. And one of them was saying, we're Mexican, no, we're American, we're Mexican-American. And then Billy piped up and said, Chale, I'm neither Mexican or American, I'm a Chicano. And I heard that. I said, Chicano? Well, I'm a Chicano too then, you know? But I knew he was a Pachuco, so I couldn't be too vocal about it. But he wore the pants and the chucos, and he smoked marijuana. I mean, he was a rebel, but he was a nice rebel, a handsome rebel. Lots of girlfriends. But he was a running partner with CC and Rookie. And CC went to the Navy, and he came back on leave and took his girlfriend, Helen, to the movies at the Delano Theater, which was segregated in those days. The Mexicans and the Filipinos and the blacks had to sit on the sides. They had no balcony. Those theaters that had balconies, that's where the colored people went, up there. But I remember going to that theater. That was my first movie theater, but we had to sit on the sides. I hated it because I could never get a direct view. But the orchestra was reserved for white people. And so CC went to the movies, and since he was a vet, he was right after World War II, he took his girlfriend and he sat in the middle. So the usher came and says, you can't sit there. And he says, who says? He says, well, the manager. So the manager came, he says, you can't sit there. And he says, I'm sitting here, I'm a vet. And so they called the police, and they took CC out of the theater. Everybody noticed, CC's in trouble. They took him to the police station and grilled him for 2 hours. They were threatening him, intimidating him, trying to break his spirit. He refused to relent. And they had to release him on his own recognizance because there was no law. He wasn't breaking. There was no law that says you can't sit in the middle. So he got away with it. He left. They had to release him. All his friends saw this. So the next weekend, everybody went to the movies and sat in the middle. All these Pachucos desegregated the Delano Theater. I saw it happen. I'll never forget it. And when I was going to Delano to join the grape strike, my mother said, you're going to go work with Cici? And I said, Cici, is that vato still around? And she laughed and said, mijo, don't you know who Cici is? He's Cesar Chavez. Cesar Chavez, the Pachuco. Now, I just saw a clip on YouTube a couple of days ago, yesterday as a matter of fact, as the lost interview with Cesar. And I was there when they were shooting it, so I remember it brought back the memories. He was confronting the cops about the violence that was happening on the picket lines. And he was saying, they're beating the hell out of the people because they're Mexicans, and they're calling us greasers and treating us less than human beings. I mean, the guy was preaching to the face of the law. And he got my total respect because that's who Cesar Chavez was. He was our voice. And I mean, we had all experienced that. And I only heard that kind of response from Pachucos, frankly. My cousin Billy was like that. He said, chale, los gabachos me caen guangos, carnal, you know? But say that to the law directly. No one had done that before Cesar came along and as a leader stood up and said, we're not going to take it anymore. And I'm not talking about violence. I'm talking about change. I'm talking about law. I'm talking about justice. And I was there, and I saw that. And it was so wonderful to see someone of our people finally standing up and speaking for the millions of us. Incredible. What a leadership. What a leadership he gave to our people. Dolores Huerta was right side. I saw her kicked off the docks here in the LA produce market. I was there when she confronted the scab grapes that we were trying to stop. And a goon came, grabbed her, and threw her off, like throwing her off the stage onto a cement floor. And we were ready to start throwing blows, but she stood up and said, no, don't stop it, don't fight. And she got up and confronted the cops again. She was hurt. But I'd never seen that kind of courage from a woman. So here, Dolores and Cesar, two voices united, becoming one voice for our people, and that's the root of the Teatro Campesino as well.
We do theater for so many different reasons. I edited an anthology of plays called Necessary Theater, plays about the Chicano experience in 1987, and of course it included the Shrunken Head of Pancho Villa, which is his first play, which is as valid today as it was in 1964 when they did it when he was a student, as he said, at San Jose State. 1964, a very, an important document. I've looked at all the plays that I've been following the playwrights, and we didn't have playwrights. He was our first playwright who not only was being produced, but then he went into the teatro, and that really gave us a voice. That was an entirely different voice. And so it was very important. We started Teatro La Esperanza. Ginger, my wife, was the business manager, my Armenian business manager. Every teatro should have an Armenian business manager. And she was also the musical director. And so, and she was a very good musical director. Our teatro started with actos by the Teatro Campesino, because in 1971, the teatro gave any teatro permission to produce any of their brilliant early actos that were written between 65 and 71, and they are still as valid today as they were then. But that's how we launched our teatro. We couldn't have done it on our own. We did an acto that we collectively tried to create for the second Chicano Theater Festival at UC Santa Cruz, and one of the local critics said it was the worst teatro he'd ever seen in his life. But it didn't stop us. We kept creating, we kept working together, and we kept working with them. We spent a lot of time in San Juan Bautista. You go to the source, and this man and his company and the people who had worked with and who had worked with him, you know, this is a big rebozo around this country of people who have seen or worked with, been influenced by the work that we have done as artists and as scholars, as people who've written about it.
What is more of a sign of intellectual elitism in theater, which usually is the territory of a certain class and a certain color? But you brought it to a level that was accessible to everyone. I mean, you were in the fields. How more accessible can you be to the poor than go to them?
You know, I think we're in the right place at the right time, and you meet the right people. You know, when history happens to humanity, we are history. You know, it's a living thing. You don't know it at the time. It'd be pretentious if you're being historical. That's not the point. But things do happen, and you can look back and reinterpret. The Shrunken Head of Pancho Villa was an attack on the stereotypes of our people. I was tired of seeing these stereotypes. So rather than try to act middle class and put a portrait of our people that didn't really exist at the time, I went to the stereotype and tried to bust it by going through it, by making it so ridiculous that people would see how ridiculous it was. And so it became, my first play was a theater of the absurd, basically, because life was absurd. And the central character is Bellarmino, who's a disembodied head. And my playwriting professor says, "Can't you put a little body on it? You know? How about a little wasted away?" I said, no body, you know? It's just a head. And he eats and farts and you know, sings like cucaracha, can't talk. And he's Bellarmino, you know, he's a big head this size. And I mean, I wanted to be ridiculous. And he sits on top of a TV set because he starts shrinking. Now, what that addresses is the idea, because we're part of an immigrant group that came from Mexico. The generation of 1916 came because of the Mexican Revolution. And everybody that came from Mexico rode with Pancho Villa, you know? And they were all generals. Every family has nothing but generals, you know, who fought with Pancho Villa. And I said, man, there are a lot of generals out here. You know, what are we doing all generals over here? We should be back in Mexico. So I decided to satirize that. And so that was the Shrunken Head, was that going from this big monolithic absurdity down to human size and becoming more real as it went. That's the structure of the play, becoming then real as it goes. But it's a Chicano family with a Pachuco and a Mingo, who's a Mexican-American. He's a gringo, you know, he's Mingo el gringo. And all of this is very personal, by the way. I'm reflecting my family at the same time. And so I wanted to bust that up. And that play has, and it turns out that the father, Pedro, is not the Villista. His mother, I mean, his wife, Cruz, is the one that rode with Pancho Villa. You know, the mother rode with Pancho Villa. And which was, again, the early Chicana recognitions through this play. But we performed this play for the Northwest Drama Conference in January of 1965. It was my last bit to do at San Jose State. I'd already graduated, and I directed and set up my play. And my playwriting professor said, "You're going to have to direct this." I said, "But I haven't prepared to be a director." He said, "Yes, you can. You're the playwright. You know your work better than anyone." So I said, "Oh, okay." And I took him at his word. So at that moment, I became a writer-director, a playwright-director, directing my own plays. So I directed this play. There were no Chicanos in this cast. I was working with Anglo actors. There were no Chicanos that could act. There was one brown guy who was Pakistani, Dawood Ismaili, and he was funny, and he was very convincing because he was brown, but that was it. But the thing is that we performed for the Northwest Drama Conference, and there were 2 American playwrights there that were my godfathers. They saw the play, and after the play, they had the talk back, and they came up on stage, and they talked about my play. And I consider these to be my godfathers because of who they were. One was William Soroyan, the Armenian playwright, who, through him, I discovered the saga of the Armenian Americans, and what happened way back in Europe, in Anatolia, what happened to Armenia, and that struggle, which was never forgotten by the immigrants that came from there, and they took shape in the form of the works of William Soroyan, who was from Fresno, and so he became my inspiration. He was at the first Chicano Theater Festival. It's another story, but he came to the first Chicano Theater Festival in 1970. And the other playwright was John Howard Lawson, who was Jewish American from New York City. He was the founder of the Writers Guild here in Hollywood because he was a screenwriter as well as a Broadway playwright. Now these 2 giants, and John Howard Lawson was one of the Hollywood 10. He was blacklisted in Hollywood, and Soroyan almost was blacklisted. So these 2 giants sat there and talked about my work, and they welcomed me into the American theater. They welcomed me into the American experience, and they said, "This is the first Mexican-American play that we've ever seen." And so that, to me, speaks volumes, because if I can identify with what happened to Armenians back then and how they came and made their place, even though a lot of them became growers and couldn't respect Cesar, doesn't matter. I understand what the immigrant conditions were. And John Howard Lawson, Jewish from Manhattan and working class, I understand that because I've always thought that of all of the Jewish playwrights and writers, the one that I respect and identify with the most is Shalom Aleichem, I don't know if you know his name. Shalom Aleichem, who wrote about his people because nobody else was doing it. So the Chicano experience translates, which is interesting. It translates if you just turn the dial and you say, let me look at myself now as a Japanese American, which is why I was able to write Valley of the Heart. It took me 20 years to come up to speed with the Japanese American viewpoint. But I said, if I were Japanese American, what would I write about? So I wrote a play, in that sense. And Zoot Suit could not exist if I hadn't had contact with African American culture, African American. Rock and roll wouldn't exist. Jazz wouldn't exist. The Zoot Suit wouldn't exist if it weren't for what black people were trying to do to restore their dignity and their writing. And to this day, some of my oldest friends in the American theater are African American playwrights and directors. So what I'm saying is that, yes, I had to do the Chicano trip. I had to do, because I'm a Chicano. But what I have done is I have related to the same process that people all over the world have related over time. And what it speaks to is the challenge of America. Are we going to be a country that only respects white people and white males on top of that? Are we going to be a country that only gives legitimacy to people from Europe? Or are we going to respect the peoples of the world, the different colors and different backgrounds and different genders and different sexes? That's the struggle. That's the struggle. And so if my plays can be done, and I've seen it done, women have done it at Pachuco, at various universities. I gave them permission. Sure, let the women do El Pachuco. Why not? They were Pachucas. But the fact is that we are a spectrum, a continuum of human experience. And if we can understand how we begin to define ourselves sexually, traditionally, racially, you'll understand that we're all the same people through different lenses, and we connect. Now, one of the reasons that I had to write The Vibrant Being is because I need to address that universality, okay, that comes out of the Chicano experience. The Chicano experience is not just for Chicanos. The Chicano experience is our reconnection with the human race, with our humanity, and that we can share all over the world.
What is the role that theater plays in changing and moving society forward? You said it has an important role, Jorge, you just said that, but what role do you see yourself playing in moving society, changing society?
Theater?
Yeah.
You asking me or Jorge?
Both of you.
I just spoke, so you go ahead.
I'm thinking that, you know, we need to define our terms. We need to define what theater means and what actor means. And, you know, we get our definitions from Aristotle, which are perfectly good. I mean, he was a little short about a couple of elements, but you got a lot right, you know, which is interesting, the whole Greek thing, you know, the Western civilization. But it's a big world, and China was there a long time ago, and Africa was there a long time ago, and the Americas were there a long time ago. And one of the things that I like to do is go back to basics, talk about roots, right? You go back to geography. Now, anthropologists now, and archaeologists, you know, they're dating the earth and saying, well, we keep backdating, you know, maybe man arrived, you know, human beings arrived in this hemisphere 20,000 years ago, 30,000 years ago, 35,000. They keep backdating it more and more and more. And so who are we as Chicanos? We have a root in this hemisphere that goes back genetically millennia. And who are the farm workers? And the farm workers are the descendants of the solar lords of ancient America. That's who we are. And yes, the Spanish came and they did their desmadre, you know, on the indigenas, but they also interbred. So we're part Spanish, but we're also indigena, largely indigena. And we need to develop the respect for that. It's not the Spanish part that's so much discredited in the modern world in the United States. It's the Indian part, it's the indigena part. And this is why, as a Chicano and as a Chicano movement, the emphasis was always on the indigena root. Not to disparage our Spanish background, but it's available, it's there. And the connection with the Arabs and the Middle East and so forth. But what happened? What about the Maya? What about all of these people? Well, it turns out that the Mayas were all actors, that they saw reality and human civilization as performance. But to assume that they only had the pyramids where they performed, these were platforms, these were ceremonial centers, that's the only place where they performed is not to read the obvious. Let me point to the map of the hemisphere. You look at Yucatan, okay, and the Gulf of Mexico. Now, the Mayas did not have the horse, but they had canoes, they had boats. Now, they didn't sail across the ocean, but they could do the water. They did hydroponics. They could make flush toilets. They understood water, and they could travel on water. They could travel. The word canoe comes from canuatl, water serpent, canuatl, canoe, canoa. Canoe means water serpent. Now, they had water serpents of different sizes. Now, if you look at the map and you look at the Yucatan and you look at the Gulf of Mexico, get in a boat, which could have happened 10,000 years ago, 15 years ago, 15,000 years ago. Get in a boat and shoot straight north. Go up to the mouth of the Mississippi, and there's the Mississippi, which was there, and sail up the Mississippi all the way up to modern St. Louis, where we had Cahokia. They wondered, what were these mound builders? Who were these people? The Americas were communicating. San Juan Teotihuacan, they didn't even know what their real name was a city in the time of Christ was somewhere between 150,000 to 250,000 people, laid out, built, with running water. Now, this is the Chicano route. This is America. And you're going to tell me that our ancestors did not travel, did not get into boats and go. They had the reasons for not sailing across the ocean, but they had canoes, large ones. And I swear to you that they went up the mouth of the Mississippi all the way up to what is St. Louis. The Americas were communicating with each other. So when we investigate our Chicano roots, we are investigating the roots of America. The America that has been ignored now for 500 years. And yes, archaeologists, ethnologists, anthropologists, they've done a wonderful job of digging and trying to structure, but they don't have the tools to understand this completely because they're not from here. We are from here. We have the genetic memory. So when I do theater, I am tapping into my genetic memory. When I do theater, I tap into what remains in my brain and in my cells of our ancestors, and so can you. So can anybody. You can tap into your ancestors. I believe that. And artists can do this because they work very deeply into themselves. So it's not just a question of ethnicities. Now, it's a question of global presence and respect. It's the same way with Africa. It's the same way with Asia, for Christ's sake, you know? China has been up and down for millennia, and they're kind of going up again, but there's fear. Americans tend to forget that they were kicking the Chinese out of here. They were treating them like animals, and they still are. They're killing them. And yet there's no respect for Chinese civilization because they're communists. Bullshit. Bullshit. It's human culture. It's human culture. And so, I'm just saying that there isn't enough knowledge and respect yet for indigenous America. But they understand us if you speak the truth. And so the Chicano truth is a very deep truth. It's a hemispheric truth. We are hemispheric Americans, and because our ancestors built pyramids that weren't for human sacrifice, these were platforms to perform. They didn't put theater in a box. They elevated theater and put it on levels so that they had ceremonies with 20,000 people operating at the same time. Now, I'm intuiting this. The future generations of scholars, inspired by the work of Jorge Huerta, will understand that they need to go back to the research and discover what was really there. But they got to get away from this fear of human sacrifice. They got to get away from this desprecio, para los indígenas. And I realized along the way that Cesar Chavez, when I saw him fasting the first time, that he was doing what the Solar Kings used to do. He was suffering for his people. He wasn't bleeding. He wasn't putting thorns through his tongue and bleeding himself the way that the Solar Lords had to do for their people. He was not eating. He stopped eating. And that was his power. I realized, my God, the spirit of our Solar Lord ancestors has resurfaced in this farm worker, in this simple, extraordinary, ordinary man who's leading us into the future. He only went to the 8th grade, but he brought with him millions of memories of our ancestors. He was the embodiment. He was a human being, not a god. He was a human being with all the contradictions of a human being. But what he did in his time with his limited resources was he opened it up. He opened up the world for us. He opened up the hemisphere. And for that, he has my eternal respect, and he should have yours as well. And Dolores has done the same thing for women. You know, a woman doesn't have to choose between having children and having a career. She is an incredible example. She has 11 kids, for Christ's sake. She has 11 children, which she had in the midst of her struggles. Now, the kids would resent her, but they don't. They love her. You see her. I had an extraordinary moment way back, 'cause I used to sleep in her kitchen floor, with all the other volunteers. And one morning we had to go chase trucks. And she said, wake me up. She says, knock on my door. So I went over there and I knocked, and she didn't answer, and I knocked again, she didn't answer. So I opened up a little crack, and I knocked, and I saw her stick her head up from this little bed, and that was Dolores. And then 7 little heads came up right around her. She was sleeping with all her kids. What a mother. And then if you've seen her talk today, she's 93 years old, God bless her. If you see her, she says she's an embodiment. She's an embodiment of woman power, of indigenous woman power, like Cesar was in the male aspect. So, Ometeot, 2 God, male, female, 1 God. That's who we are. We are all women before we're men. A few of us women get changed into males because we reproduce. That's why we still have chichis, you know. But these are useless. There's no milk there, you know. But this is a sign that we used to be women. We used to be women. Just like women also have penises, but they're, you know, they're not the same. But the thing is that we are the same. We're 2 parts of the same whole. We're 2 parts of the same whole. There must be gender respect. There must be unity. And everything in between. There's male and there's female and the whole spectrum between. I mean, we're talking gays, we're talking trans, we're talking people. You can't define the human race and say, okay, male is just this. They're white and that. And the woman is this. That's bullshit. We're humanity. And we spread over the whole spectrum of the human race. Time. What is time? Time is a construct, you know, of the mind. And we sense time passing. And yes, you do have to be on time. And it's good to be on time. Remember, we were in New York, right? And I have to mention what you printed up. If you can't be late if you're ahead of your time, right? So, but the fact
he
is,
said that. He made that up there at the meeting.
that you're on time, you're ahead of your time. You behind. You know, we have these concepts, and I was mentioning the Mayans, you know, and I was very happy to be able to go to Mexico City and do the Spanish language world premiere of Zoot Suit, right? Which they received, you know, open arms. It was voted the best Mexican musical of the year, you know, in 2010. But, and it was back home, man, at the UNAM, and then the Compañía Nacional de Teatro, the national company, took it around the country, and including Tijuana, and performed Zoot Suit in Espanol, you know, and that was wonderful. But I was tapping into a modern urban center. It's a world center. It's Mexico City. And they do a lot of European theater and a lot of American theater and the musicals, and they do them very well. They have some wonderful designers. Very little indigena stuff, you know, that really speaks to the issue. I'm happy to say that one of my sons one-upped me. He went even farther. Because the oldest extant play in the American, the one that still exists, is El Rabinal Achí, which is a Mayan play from Guatemala, Mayan land, about the warrior of Rabinal. And Lakin, my son, who's here, Lakin, stand up. He's right there. All right, playwright and director and actor, and a compañero, Andrew Saito, who's half Japanese, or is he full Japanese American? He's full Japanese American. Went to Rabinal, went to the highlands of Guatemala where the death squads have been working overtime, and they performed, they went to witness the Rabinal as performed by the indigenas there in the highlands of Guatemala. And then they went twice, and they took some of the workshop exercises of El Teatro Campesino and plugged in with the Mayan campesinos. Now, time. Were they going back into the past? Or was this the presence of ancient culture in our time? Mayan culture is timeless because it measures time. Okay? You need to know that they had 2 calendars. 2 calendars. The solar calendar, which we all know, 365 days. 360 days, 18 months of 20 days each, plus 5 days of dark time, when they put out the fires and they had to start again. And then there's a sacred calendar, the Tzolk'in, which is 260 days. Now it turns out that these two calendars notch. And 260 days is almost exactly 9 months. And what this calendar refers to is the process of gestation and generation, the time of our birth, the time that we spend in the womb, and how that reflects and echoes itself throughout the rest of our lives. We need, in order to understand our ancestors, we need to understand their concept of time, which is why I had to jot this down. After a lot of years working with campesinos and then beginning to question what it is exactly that we're doing and what our exercises are all about, I had to put this down into writing, into words. And you're going to see a lot of illustrations. I'm going to show you some.
You got them.
Here we go. These are the 20-day signs of the Tzolk'in. And this is how they ratchet with the Hab, the 365 solar year. And in order to establish a date, you had to have a date from the solar calendar matched in with the one with the Tzolk'in, the sacred calendar. And so this happens to be the calendar, the date that's circled there is the beginning of the world, the beginning of our time, the Quinto Sol, which ended on December 21st, 2012. We're into the Sexto Sol now. We are into a whole different time. The weather's weird. Not that it hasn't been weird in the past, but it's weird. The world is changing. There's a lot of rapid movement because we're into the Sexto Sol. And we need to understand our own time, okay? Because we may come close to extinction, but probably not. We will survive. The Maya did not survive. They became us. We became their descendants. In any case, let me go to another, please. Can you have another one? Okay, what you see here is the Hab, the solar calendar with all of the hieroglyphs that talk about the 20 days of each of the 18 months. Let's go to the next one. Tzolk'in over here on the left. Go ahead. Next. There you go. 20 days of the Tzolk'in. 13 months of 20 days each equals 260 days. Imish ikakbal kanchichankimi manik namat muluk ok chwen eben ishmen kid gaban snap wakahau. Now each of these is representative. It's 4 columns of 5 signs each. And what this relates to is the body, the heart, the mind, and what I call the spirit. Go to the next slide, please. Bing, bing. This is the explanation here. The 20 footsteps of the creative footsteps, the 4 columns, the body, the heart, the mind, the spirit. And what these relate to eventually is motion, emotion, notion, and vibration. You get motion, and emotion means out of motion, okay? So one of the things that the artist understands, dancers understand this, is that you can express emotion through your motion. If you don't understand that, you don't understand what your body is. This is when I say I'm 83 years old, folks. Because I've been on the ball, with actors. This is why El Teatro Campesino, in order to relate to farm workers, couldn't just stand up there and talk. Couldn't just sit in chairs and have conversation. That wasn't going to do it. If you're going to relate to people that make their living like this, then you better move your ass. So early Teatro Campesino was that. It had to be dynamic. It had to be motion. Because out of that came emotion. And what's interesting is that out of emotion then comes notion. One of the ways to get to the mind is through the heart. First through the body, then through the heart, then to the mind. If you're a teacher, you know that in order to teach your kids, it's best to love them first. You gotta love your kids. If they sense that you love them, you can teach them. If you don't love them, if you resent it, you're not going to teach shit. You're not going to teach them anything. They're not going to pick it up. This is where racism kicks in, sexism, all of that. Teachers don't know what they're doing unless they respect and love their students. That's part of teaching. Vibration. I'm not talking about a mental concept. I'm talking about vibrating. I'm talking about your life and how you activate that. And you can raise, like you raise your kundalini, you can raise the level of your vibration by working it. Work the body, work the heart, work the mind, and eventually you get to the spirit column. Kib up there, that's faith. Faith. Men is belief. That's belief. You can believe intellectually, you can believe all kinds of stuff. But if you don't have faith, which means believe in something greater than yourself, believe in something bigger than you, because you're all going to die. We're all going to die. So what's left after you're gone? What's left is what you leave to the people that come after you. And whether you call that God or you call that religion, that's part of the continuum, what I call the body, heart, mind continuum. Now, Aristotle defined emotion, motion, and notion, heart, mind, and body. Heart he called pathos, mind he called logos, spirit he called ethos, which is morality. What he didn't really define, although the Greeks did it in sculpture, they sculptured human bodies in stone that were exact replicas, beautiful replicas of the human body, male and female. You know, that's why Greek statues, although they painted them, in colors, but they're anatomically correct. But the Greeks dealt with their sexuality in other ways. But the first column is eros, which we mistake for just erotic and sex. It's not sex, it's not just sex. Sex is number 6. Sex is a hexagon. And as a hexagon turns into the Star of David. A hexagon is one of the building blocks of the universe, of the world. So to understand your body, you understand the hexagon, right? So, eros, pathos, logos, ethos. This connects back to Aristotle, but it goes one better. It goes back to our Mayan ancestors who were actors, who were producers, and they had to be huge spectacles. But you know what? When they acted in conjunction with the stars and with the planet turning. They had enormous connection with the earth. Let me see the next slide. I don't know what the next one is. Let me see if I forget. Oh, the ball game. They had the ball, 400 cities of stone throughout the Mesoamerica, and the ball game is now coming back again. This shows you some of the modern interpretations, but they played the ball game. Why was the ball game? Because they had to move their spine. Now, when you move your spine, what you're doing is you're generating power. You're generating power. Now, without this movement, there's no human race. You know what I mean? You gotta. No, but that's the U-joint. That is what gives you dance, what gives you basketball, what gives you baseball, what gives you mariachi, you know, whatever it is. It comes from whatever drove the ball game. And they had the rubber ball. Nobody else had the rubber ball. Not in the world. They had leather balls, they had wooden balls. No one had the rubber ball. And you know something else? The ball bounced because it was vulcanized. It wasn't B.F. Goodrich that discovered vulcanization. It was the Mayans. They had a plant that they could combine, and the ball bounced. Now this is coming back. Next, let me see, I think we're almost okay, these are the balls. We use soccer balls. Number 5, there's a real rubber ball from the Mayans. Next, please. And this is like one of the exercises that we do, getting on the ball. Learning to get up on the ball and balance, because you learn balance, right? And you squat, you stand. We teach this, and this is Cuatro Movimiento down there, the symbol that we use. This is from an early workshop back in the 90s. Next, This is, I've got to give credit to credit is due. This is Domingo Martinez Paredes, my master teacher, a Mayan from the Yucatan, who wrote books that I incorporated into my teaching. We were in Mexico City with the Teatro Campesino in 1972 when I met him, and he gave me copies of his books, his paperback copies. You know, he was drummed out of the University of Mexico City because all these scholars from England and from the United States didn't like him. He kept saying, you don't understand the Mayan language. I speak the Mayan language, you guys are misinterpreting. So because of their professional pride was injured, they drummed him out, and when I met him, he was still making his living writing letters for others, working as an escribano. He died in 1984, but I revere his memory, and I mention him in the book. Next, I think. Y se acabó. That's it. Okay. All right.
Okay. So we have.
This is the book. This is the book that I have interpreted as a messenger, a conveyor, from not as an anthropologist, not as an archaeologist, but as a theater artist, that I've tapped in to my farm worker genetic memory in order to understand the mathematics of the Mayan culture and our ancestors.
I appreciate the fact that how you are so in touch with so many different nationalities, and I think that's beautiful. Did you get that knowledge and that love of all people by traveling? Did that help you, or was that just something that came from how you were raised?
You're asking me? You know, I was born and raised in California, and this is a blessed place because everybody's here from all over the world. You know, more and more. We don't have to pretend that only one people have been here. You know, the indigenas were multiple here. There are many, many tribes before the coming of any Europeans. But since then, the whole world is here in California, but in America as a whole. And if you are really an American, you relate to that. I can't conceive of the world and of reality without other people, without black people, without Asians, without women, without children. I mean, with everybody, you know. It's to me, the multiple faces of the human race. It comes through just living here, that's all. It wasn't crafted. I've had some great teachers, you know, like Jorge mentioned. Most of them were Anglo at some point, you know, but they respected me. And from grammar school on, and from my teacher, I didn't know who taught me, who took my taco bag and made a monkey mask for years until I gave a speech in Monterey, and the superintendent of the Stratford School District in the San Joaquin Valley was there. And he said, I'm gonna go back and check on you. And so he did. So a week later, he sent me a photostatic copy of the attendance record of Stratford Grammar School from 1946. It was handwritten, and there at the bottom was Louis Valdez. And at the top was the teacher's name that I never knew. Her name was Ruth Tremaine. And God bless her, you know, if she's still alive, she must be 150 years old, you know. But no, the fact is that she inspired me without knowing, you know, that taco bag gave me my life. But what's amazing is at the bottom, where my name is, I was in that school for 30 days. I was a migrant child that came and went for 30 days. But those 30 days determined the rest of my life. Now, if I didn't respect Ruth Tremaine, but I respected her in my memories, even though I didn't know her name, or my Japanese American, African American, Filipino American teachers over the years. My English teacher, I hope he's still alive, he's in his 90s, but I speak like him because he was my speech teacher as well. And he shocked me a few years ago when he says, I want you to speak at my funeral. And I think, for anybody who requests that, you know, that's an act of love. And I must say, I love the man. I hope he's still alive. I've lost track with him because of the pandemic. But he loved my wife too, you know. But the fact is that all my teachers, you know, have come from different races and backgrounds, and both men and women. And if you can't learn enough to respect the people that you meet along the way, you're not learning anything.
In 1973, you published through Cucaracha Press, which was the Teatro Campesino's publishing house, Pensamiento Serpentino, Serpentine Thought. And it's a Bible, really. It's a wonderful, wonderful treatise. It's poetic, it's poetry, it's bilingual, trilingual, and it's about love. It's about being a Chicano. Anybody can be a Chicano. He said this before. The people in the teatro were not always just Chicanos, Mexicanos, Filipinos, or African Americans. There were white people too. There were people marching with the campesinos all the way to Sacramento from all cultures of the world. But I urge you, it's in the collection, Pensamiento Serpentino. It's listed in the bibliography of the book because it also talks about in la Quech, and then I'll be quiet. In la Quech, tell them.
In la Quech, it's a Mayan term. Tú eres mi otro yo. You are my other self. Si te amo y te respeto a ti, if I love and respect you, me amo y respeto yo. I love and respect myself. You know, we're a collective being. Again, there's so many ways to approach this. You know, someone had said about the Pensamiento Serpentino, it reminds me, the serpentine thought, right? Mm-hmm. This is the wave principle. The wave, you know, there are 4 waves, light waves. You know, there's light waves, and there's microwaves, and there's radio waves, and, you know, they come in force. But these are waves. The universe is defined by waves. But in human history, those waves, the up and down, and in your life, the waves of your life, it's the spiral of your life. It's the spirals of your life are where the serpentine thought is. And a serpent curls up because that's a natural form. The universe does that. Galaxies do that. And so you need to understand that in your life, you are going through the wave principle. And every 9 years, your body reproduces itself. In other words, from the time that you were born until you were 9 years old, every cell in your body was eventually replaced. And when you're 9 years old, you're starting new again. You have a whole new body. And it happens again at 18. And it happens again at 27. And it happens again at 36, and 45, and 54, and 63, and 72, and 81, and 90. And so what happens then is that we go through the spirals of our lives, and we get very confused because they say, why am I doing this again? Is that your life spirals around, and you come to where you were, the place where you exactly were, but you're on a different level. You keep growing. That's the power of 0, is to graduate. It's to graduate. The power of 0 is the power of the spiral, because 0 was a spiral, as I mentioned here, for the Maya. So you understand, playwrights need to understand this if they're going to write about human behavior. Life isn't a straight line. It's a spiral. It is the wave principle. And so that relates to, well, a host of definitions, you know. Pensamiento Serpentino was my first attempt back in 1972 to try to touch these ideas that were formulating in my head. I didn't have all the words then, but the poem still stands up, you know. I thought things were going to change a lot faster than they have, but it's still, most of the poem is still fairly accurate, you know. I wouldn't change any of it. But the fact is that poetry is the ability of human beings to tap into their intuitive self and to be able to express something very, very deep. That's why poetry is so essential to our lives.
First of all, thank you for being here tonight. It's been a delight. It gives me just chills to hear 2 fellow Chicanos say Chicanismo with such pride. We've kind of lost our way about that. My wife and I are products of Cal State Northridge in the early 70s, when the Chicano movement was very, very strong, very, very strong here. And when we left after graduating from here as Chicano studies majors, it was explicit that we were going to be soldiers of the movement. And for the rest of our career, for the rest of our lives, we have contributed many times in small ways, sometimes in medium ways, but to advancing the betterment of Chicanos. So since then, though, things have kind of, as you said, have rolled, and we seem to have lost our way in many ways. Some not, many yes. And since we have students in the audience, perhaps you could, both of you actually, because both of you have such great history, you could share how do we realign our thinking to understand that our role as Chicanos is to advance the betterment of humankind, but specifically of Chicanos. So if either of you would like to comment on that.
I've been working on a book, I think I told you this, Luis, on aging, what else, which is titled No Sudden Moves, A Gentleman's Guide to Aging Gracefully, right? But I think it should be applied to young people as well. No sudden moves. Think before you act. It's very important that we think before we open our mouths and to focus. And I have to go back to this book. When we were working on this book, not only were we in the middle, when he was writing it and I was working with him and with Michael Chemers, our wonderful editor, we were in the middle not only of the pandemic, but of the catastrophe in the White House. And it was difficult to focus. I would lose focus thinking about what was going on. And it is no easier today to lose focus and to forget. One of the important things that you taught me a long time ago, I don't know if you still do this, this is a man of many seasons, right? He's a filmmaker, he's an actor, he's a director, all of it. And I said to Luis, I said, can you work on 2 projects at the same time? And he said, yes. Do you still believe that? And this has to do with focusing, right? If you've lost focus on this project, do you move to another one? How do you do it? Do you do it?
Well, again, time. This book didn't, I wrote it, literally during the pandemic. We put it together and had the advice of Jorge and others who were reading what was happening. But it came out of the 90s. It started back in the 70s. So what did it take? 30 years, 40 years to put this book together? So that's not long. But these are part of my life. Sometimes some things are going to take that long, right? I have plays that I have intended to write that I haven't written yet, but I thought about them 50 years ago. Okay, I started writing plays seriously in 1960. So it's been over 60 years. And yet, in terms of life, that's just a breath. Don't let time trip you up. One of the things that you need to understand is the wave principle. The Chicano movement came as a part of a global wave. It wasn't just Chicanos. It was a civil rights movement. There was a global youth movement in Europe and in Asia and all over the world. Africa was nationalizing. It went well and then not so well too in Africa because there were reverses and betrayals and so forth. Don't expect everything's going to be resolved all at once. But also in terms of our lives, there's a personal clock. We're all aging, I haven't gotten to this age without problems like everybody else, teeth, eyes. I'm wearing hearing aids, okay? It took me a long time I don't always wear these anyway, but for these, I want to hear you, so I put them on, right? Went over to Costco and bought a pair, okay, go on, If I could go to another store and buy a pair, I would do it again, But it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. I'm happy to be able to urinate, these days. No, but it happens. And so when you're dealing with that, you no longer have time to be out there marching, And okay, I'll march if there are bathrooms along the way. I can't hold it as much as I used to, all of this is going to, and then if you have kids, if you have children, or you have grandchildren, all of that attends, and you haven't got time and opportunity to be as radical as you once were. So it's really, but it doesn't matter because you're no longer 20-something. Yeah. Other people are 20-something, but they're not at the same place where the wave is happening, okay? We were very fortunate as to be 20-somethings just as that wave was breaking, back in the 60s. Whoa, vámonos, And suddenly everybody was out there picketing, and marijuana was coming into vogue, and rock and roll was rocky, man. Hijo, free love everywhere, que suave, Well, that changed because we ran into AIDS and with the women's movement, the women say, órale, córtensela, cabrones, And that's great. It had to be. It had to be. I'm happy that all that has happened. But the fact is that you have to watch the waves, like a surfer. Now, if you're a surfer, you don't get out on any wave. No. You're out there paddling around, waiting for the wave, right? And, here it comes. Hop on it and go for it, right? It's not going to last forever. You know, it's going to break. And it's that way now. I believe that things are about to change for the better, but it's really frightening at the same time. Mm-hmm. You know, it's really, the rise of fascism in this country has become too apparent. There are too many people that are hating as a way of life. What the hell is that, you know? You don't have to hate them. I don't remember Cesar really he hated injustice, but I don't remember talking about let's hate our enemies. That's not what it's about. What it's about is loving yourself. The Chicano movement is about loving yourself, loving your people, loving your origins. And you can share that with other people, black people that love their culture and their color and their skin. Great. Asians, también. White people, seguro que sí. You know? Let's go all women, loving women. Fine. Está bien. We need to have kids, though, okay? What's happening is that birth rates have plummeted in Japan. That's a country of old people. They're not going to have enough young people to support the old people. We're headed there in America as well. For a while, I thought, well, Latinos will take care of it. You know? That's not going to stop us. And it's changing. The Latino birth rate is also dipping. Now, why is that? I think part of it is that we're so involved in our own thing. That young men and women are into. I never understood why males get so pushed out of shape because women are declaring their identity and their power. What happened to all the heavies? You know, we used to have so many heavies in the 60s, males and Chicano leaders. What happened to all the Chicano leaders, you know? You don't hear about them anymore. Well, it comes back from loving yourself. And the imperative for me is to educate our people, the Chicanos, about who they are. Don't forget who Chicanos are, and work on it, and work on it. We need to find where the wave is going to break next. And I'm looking, hopefully, at the rest of the 80s. I mean, my 80s, you know. at the rest of the decade, hoping that the 20s will not be the next depression, that it will be the rise rather than the fall. But I'm trying to understand the wave, you know, it's breaking in a different ways. But it begins with you. Who do you love? Do you love yourself enough to spread that love to the people around you, right? To the Chicanos that are with you. You Chicano leaders, do you love yourself enough now to continue and to be vocal? And we are trying to do, we have the Jorge and Luis show, you know, going around to various campuses because we felt the need, quite frankly. It was, I don't need to get up and give histrionic speeches, but I love to lecture about the Mayas, and this is a format that I'm very comfortable with, but I realize a lot of us need to get out there and talk more. A lot of us need to agitate more, you know, agitate more. And a lot of it has to do with the arts. It has to do with the arts. My friend Luis Alfaro, the playwright, has just written a new play. One of my other sons is in it, was in it. They just closed at the Magic Theater in San Francisco. He's probably coming to LA. It's called The Travelers. Very philosophical play. It's a different turn on the Chicano experience, you know. He's got a lot to say, Luis Alfaro. He grew up in Delano and Earlymont like I did, so I'm anxious to hear that. But the fact is that we have to do more, all of us. The Chicano movement is you, and you, and you, and you, and you. And if it's the Armenian movement, or the African American movement, or the women's movement, it's the same movement. Okay? Thank you all.
Thank you.
¡Viva la causa!
¡Que viva!
¡Viva la raza!
¡Que viva!
¡Viva la Virgen de Guadalupe!
¡Viva!
¡Viva César Chávez!
¡Que viva César Chávez!
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 de la mañana. El sol calienta ranchos anchos y de luz todos los baña. Ya esos campos solo van los que no saben. Viva la huelga, viva la huelga, viva la causa de